Hello, welcome to my tutorial on Strapi. I'm going to run through a really simple quick start demo. We're going to introduce Strapi, we're going to show you how to get it set up on your local machine, and then we're going to deploy it to Google App Engine, and finally we'll test it out, make sure that the API is working with Postman. They describe it as an open source headless CMS, and one of the great features about it is that you can create the backend, host it somewhere, and then access it from any platform and use the same authentication system for all of them. It's also self-hosted and open source, so it's completely free, there's no monthly costs, and if you're using Heroku or AWS, or in this case Google App Engine, you can use their free tiers and host the whole thing for free. First things first, I recommend you find the Strapi documentation, as most of this tutorial is going to be following that documentation, so if you get stuck at all, I'd recommend referring to this. So let's go to installation, and we're going to be using the command line interface for this installation. Now if you don't have Node.js or NPM installed, then I recommend you install those first. It's very straightforward. Go to nodejs.org and there are instructions there. And Yarn is optional. I'm not going to be using Yarn in this tutorial, I'll be using NPM. So once you have Node installed, you can move to step 2, which is to create a new project. So go ahead and open up a command prompt. I'm using Windows PowerShell here, but you can use just the standard Windows command prompt as well. And then browse to the directory where you want to install Strapi. And then under step 2, you can click the npx option and copy this, Control-C, and right-click to paste. And the bit you'll want to change is my project. So you can call this whatever you like. I'm going to change it to my Strapi Quick Start. So after the installation scripts have run, you should see something like this, and you should see your browser automatically open up localhost :1337 /admin auth register. So this is the Strapi backend interface. This will be your root admin login for your local installation, so don't worry too much about what you type here, but it is worth making a note of your password so that you can log in to your local instance in the future. When you're ready, click Ready to Start, and you'll be taken through to the main admin screen. So just a really quick tour of the admin screen. You've got the users table. Currently there are no users added. You can manually add new users by clicking the Add New User button. And that's been saved in the database. We'll also have a quick look at the content types builder. This is where you can add new data views. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but let's just create a quick collection to show how it works. Click Create New Collection. Continue. And then we're going to create one field for this composer called name, and then finish. And then make sure you click save in the top right to confirm, and it will restart the server for you. And we now have a composer table up here, as well as our user collection type. As far as the local installation goes, that's it. We now have a complete REST API built from scratch in a very short space of time. You'll now be able to send requests to your local server with authentication requests, and you can log in, you can register, and you'll also be able to query this composers table. One thing to note is that you'll need to make sure that any new tables, any new collection types you've created are accessible publicly. So go to roles and permissions, and the authenticated role is editable by clicking on that icon. And then if you scroll down, you'll be able to see your new collection type here, composer, and you can check which functions are available to this authenticated user. In this case, I'm going to select find and find one, and then click save. And actually, if you go back into the authenticated role and click on one of these, you'll be able to see the API route for getting this endpoint data. So like I said, we've now got a local Strapi server running that has a backend API exposed. To prove this, we're going to jump into Postman. If you don't have Postman already, just Google download Postman. And once you've got it opened up, I'll show you how to connect to our local instance. So click the plus symbol here, and we're going to do a post request. Now the one I want to show you first is the registration. So let's go back to the Strapi documentation and scroll down on the left hand side to plugins, roles and permissions. And this gives you information about how to make an authentication request. The basics of the authentication request are quite simple. You make a request to the API endpoint, and it will give you a JWT token, which you can then save either on your app or wherever you're accessing this data, and easily make authenticated requests in the future. You get a JWT token for both registration requests and login requests. So this example shows you how to make a request on this fictional posts table. So once we've made a login request, we'll get a JWT token, and you can use it here to get the contents of this table. I'll show you how to do that in a second, but first we're going to authenticate a new user, which is under the registration section. It shows you how to do this. This is using Axios, which is a library you can use to make API requests, but in this case we're just using it through Postman. So we're going to copy the raw URL here and over in Postman, and we'll paste that into the request URL section there, and click on the body tab to change what we're actually sending the endpoint, and select form data. Now if you go back to the Strapi documentation, you can see there are 3 bits of data we need to send: username, email and password. So back in Postman we'll create these 3 data fields: username, email and password, and just enter in any test values for now, and then click send. And once that's gone through, down below make sure you've got the body selected and you're viewing JSON, but here you'll see the response from our local server. So this is the JWT token I was talking about earlier. This will allow you to make authenticated requests, and you also have this user object. So this is all the information about the new user you've just created, and to prove that this has worked, to prove that this has both been authenticated and this new user has been created in our backend, you can go back to the admin interface, go to our users collection, and you'll see we've now got a test user. And you can use exactly the same principle to log in as your test user. You have a slightly different endpoint. It's auth/local instead of auth local register, and you only need 2 values. You need the identifier and a password. The identifier can be either the email address or the username. And similarly, once you've sent that through, you'll get a JWT token that you can use for authenticated requests. Now I'll quickly show you how to find our composers endpoint. So let's add a composer quickly just to show how this works. And you'll automatically get these created at and updated at fields. And you'll see from the documentation that the format is this. So let's paste this into Postman and then change this to composers, and we'll change this to a get. Now if you scroll up and we'll change the body, we no longer need to send all of these data points. You'll see that we need a header with authorization and the token preceded by bearer. And you'll see that I got the get from here. This would be post if it was post, but this one's get. So let's copy this header under headers. Let's add it as a key, and then we'll get rid of these other values whilst we're here. And then under the value for header, you'll see it says bearer and then token. So let's copy and paste that and replace this token with the token we received in the previous call, which is down here. So copy that, and there it is. Let's click send. And now you can see it's returned our composers endpoint with the only one that's in there at the moment, which is Beethoven. If there were more, you'd see these duplicated with the other values. And it really is as simple as that. If you want to get a specific item from the database, you can use the ID as well. So you can use composers/1 in this case. Click send, and you've got that specific data item. So at this point, you can have a play around, create your own collection types, create your own data points, and practice logging in and registering with new users. But I'm going to plow on now and show you how to deploy this to Google App Engine. Again, I'll be using the Strapi documentation for this. They've got a good guide on deploying to your chosen platform. So let's click on that. Now the first section will run you through what we've already done. We actually did this on NPX, so don't worry about that. But you will have to go down and make sure you've committed this to Git. If you don't have Git installed, Google install Git and you can download the package for Windows or Mac. And then once you've done that, make sure you reopen PowerShell or the command line interface you're using. And now when you type Git, you should see a load of options come up. So make sure that you're in the actual directory that Strapi's been installed into. If you type ls, you should see a directory structure similar to this one. And you do a git init, a git add, and then a first commit. All this does is it initiates a Git instance in that folder and tracks everything for you. And next you'll have to make sure you've got the Cloud SDK installed. That's a program from Google that allows you to run Google SDK commands from your command line. I won't run through how to install that, but click this link and it will guide you through that process. At this point, you'll also need to sign up for Google Cloud Platform. So go to cloud.google.com/appengine and you'll need to run through the sign up process. I won't talk you through how to do that. I'll assume you can do that yourselves, but click try it for free and follow the prompts. And once you've signed up, you should be presented with a screen similar to this one. Click create application, choose a region. I'm going to use Europe, and then create app. Now, if you go back to the Strapi documentation here, it will talk you through these steps as well. It says to select the language Node.js. So let's do that. and it recommends a standard environment. Click Next. So here it prompts you to download the Cloud SDK. You should have done that in the previous step, but if you haven't, do that now. And it asks you to initialize your SDK. You can do that by copying this command and pasting it into your command line. Now, if you've already got a configuration set up like me, it'll ask you to whether you want to change. In this case, I do, so I'm going to select to create a new configuration. But if you're starting from scratch, you'll just want to create a new configuration. It'll talk you through those steps. So I press 2 and enter. It'll ask you to name your configuration, and then it will ask you to log into your account. That will take you through to a login page, and you can log in with the details you've just created. In this case, we're going to create a new project, and we're going to call it Strapi Tutorial. And once that's finished, you should see something like this. If we go back to the Google Cloud interface, you can now click on the top right console, or you can go back to here. And if you select under all, you should see that you now have Strapi Tutorial, or whatever you've called it. Click on that one and it will open that specific project. So next we want to create a database to use with this app. If you scroll down the left hand side, you should, under storage, you should see SQL or SQL. Click on that. It will take you through to this dialog asking you to select a billing account. Select the one you've set up earlier, click Set Account, and let's create a Cloud SQL instance. Make sure you choose Postgres SQL, and this will automatically spin up a Postgres SQL instance for you. And once that's done, you'll be presented with a list of fields. The first one is instance ID, so call this whatever you like. I'm going to call this Strapi Tutorial again, and it'll ask you to set a password. I'm going to generate that one, and again you can select a region. I'm going to go for London. Stick with the default database version. In this case it's version 12. Once you're happy with all that, click Create, and it will create the instance for you. Once you get this screen, you might need to wait a couple of minutes for the instance to start running, but you can already click through and it will give you some information about your instance. Now if you scroll down on this page, you'll see a useful bit of information here, which is the connection name. Make a note of that, or at least make a note where to come back to, because we'll need that information in a second. For now we will scroll back to the top and just wait for this spinner to stop so we know that the instance is running correctly. And once you've got that green tick, we're good to go. You want to click on databases on the left hand side. You'll see that it's created a default Postgres database. We're going to create a separate Strapi one. Just call it Strapi or whatever you like. Make sure you remember this database name because we'll need it in a second. Once you've clicked create, it'll come up with a confirmation here and you should see it in the list there. Great. So next, you'll need to open up the folder that you've got the local Strapi instance installed on your hard disk, the one we set up first. If you go back to the Google App Engine documentation on strapi.io, you should see, if you scroll down, a section called create app.yml and .cloudignore. So open up your project root directory in your editor of choice. I'm using Sublime Text. You should see a directory structure similar to this. Now create a new file called app.yml and copy the standard code here. Just copy and paste that directly into your text editor. And you'll need to change a couple of things here. Make sure that the database name is the same as what you called your database. In this case, I called mine Strapi as well. And make sure that your username and password match up. I'm going to use my super secure password 123. And the instance connection name is that value that was available on the instance page. I'll go back and show you where to get it anyway. If you go back to the Google Cloud Platform page, you can just double check that your database name is correct under databases, and under overview, you should see that under connection name, this is, if you copy that, this is the bit you want to put in here. And you copy this again on the on the beta settings Cloud SQL instances there. And going back to the GCP SQL page, if you have any doubts about your username or password, you can check that here. As you can see, the default username is Postgres, and I set up the password earlier. You can change the password here as well. So once you're happy with all this, make sure you save it. And then if you go back to the documentation, you'll see that there's a couple of other things we need to do. We need to add app.yml to .gitignore. So if you go back to your text editor, open up .gitignore, and at the bottom we're going to add app.yml and save that. And then scroll down and you'll see the template for .cloudignore as well, .gcloudignore. So copy that, go back to your text editor, and we're going to create a new file. And we're calling this one .gcloudignore. And just paste those values straight in and save. Now the next step is configuring the database. So there's one command you need to run on the database instance itself. So copy that command, Control-C, and then go back to your database page, and you should see under Overview, there is the option to connect using Cloud Shell. Click that and it will open up this mini command prompt. This allows you to run commands directly on the server, and you don't have to worry about connecting via SSH or anything like that. Delete the default command. What we want to do is just paste the yarn add pg after the $sign and press enter. And that'll take a couple of seconds and it will install Postgres on the server itself. Once you've done that, it should say done in however many seconds, and you can go ahead and close the terminal. The next file you need to edit will be the database.js, and you can find this within your config path. So if you copy all of this and then go back to your text editor, and under config, you should see a database.js file there. I'm just going to remove all of this and replace it with what I've just copied. And if you read through this, you'll see that it's connecting with something called Bookshelf to the Postgres server, and it connects through this host, which automatically takes the instance connection name, the database name, user and password that we set in here, apps.yml, and passes that through to the connection. So save that, and then back in your local command line interface, make sure you're in your Strapi directory, and we'll need to install Postgres locally so that Strapi knows how to talk to our new database. You do this by typing npm install pg-save and pressing enter. And there's one final step to set up before we can deploy. In the package.json file, you'll need to add this GCP build to the scripts command. So if you copy GCP build, that line, and then we're going to go into package.json and look for the scripts section that's here. So let's add a comma to the previous line and then paste our GCP build line and save. Now we should be ready to deploy our instance. If you've done the gcloud setup that we did previously, all you should need is this bit here. So copy that, and we'll go back to our local terminal, or PowerShell in my case. Make sure you're in the correct directory still, and right click to paste that command, gcloud app deploy. Press enter, and you should see that it confirms your project that you're deploying this to. In my case, it's called Strapi tutorial. If it's the first time, which it is for us, we'll be selecting the region to deploy it to. I'm going to pick Europe West, which is number 8, and press enter. So you want to check in the description source that it's using your Strapi directory, and make sure that the target project is Strapi tutorial, or the one you set up. These are less important, so don't worry too much about those, and then press enter to confirm. And now might be a good time to put on a pot of tea, because this will take a few minutes to deploy. Once that's done, you should see something similar to this. You can see that you can use this command gcloud app browse to automatically open your Strapi instance in your browser. Now if everything goes according to plan, you should see this welcome screen, which will allow you to set up your default username as we did on our local instance. Now because this is a production deployment, you're going to want to be a bit more careful about the passwords, and make sure everything's secure and you're using your own email address. If for whatever reason you get an error that looks a bit like this, if you browse to your Google Cloud Platform page and make sure you're on the correct project, then you'll see that on the left hand side, if you scroll down, once it's loaded, if you scroll down, you should come down to logging. And if you click that section, it'll take you through to the server logs, which allows you to see a bit more details about what might be going wrong. Once this is loaded, if you scroll to the bottom, you'll see the most recent errors. And the first time I tried this, I was getting an error about something to do with PG not being installed, and that meant that Postgres had not been installed correctly. So all I had to do was run this command locally and make sure the PG section was in my dependencies, and it worked when I deployed again. But congratulations if you managed to get to this stage. That's the hard part done. So fill out these details, and then in a minute we will use Postman to check that we can access our newly deployed production API. And once you've done that, you'll be presented with your backend admin page again, and you can see that we've got our composers table collection and our users. You'll notice that because we've got a new database, there are no values in here anymore. But we can now copy this URL. So if we take our appspot URL, copy it, go back to Postman, and let's do a register. So if you paste the root part of the URL, then you go back to the Strapi documentation, go into plugins again and roles and permissions, scroll down until you can find the authenticated or the registration section, and you'll see that the rest of the URL is auth local register. So let's copy that, paste that after your root URL, and then get rid of this authorization or any other headers you might have. And under body, we're going to add in some form data again. And you'll see that we need username, email, and password. Type these in, and let's do some dummy values just to test. And make sure that it's a post request, and then click send. And when it comes back, you'll see that we've got a successful response from our live API. Now, if you go back to our instance, our backend interface, and refresh, you'll see that we now have this test user and everything's working fine. So that's about it. I would recommend you browse through the documentation on the Strapi website to get more familiar with things like collection types and how to build relations within the database. But your backend API is now production ready, and you can start sending requests to it. You can start hooking up to your front end, whether it be React or anything else. Please let me know in the comments if you're having any issues or if there's anything you'd like me to cover in more detail. If by any chance you are interested in learning the piano and you happen to have a Oculus Quest headset, then please consider supporting my piano VR project called Grand Reality. Basically, I'm making a VR piano app which is free to download and will teach you to play the piano in virtual reality. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.